Okay, so after all that horror stuff, I decided it's probably time to do comedies again, and this is one that Owen had been on my case about for a while, particularly for some reason he and many people have this fascination with heavyweights, so, which I saw once forever ago on like an on-demand channel, and then I never saw again because I didn't care for it, but I thought, well, I guess another viewing won't do it any harm. As you can see, it's from the library, so, and then, obviously, the choice that kept occurring to us, pretty much more than any other, was that Major Payne would be the one to go with it. But the thing about it is, even though that's the way this pretty much came about, this is basically going to be the "I'll bet Major Payne's a lot better than you remember it is" video. Oh, by the way, we're going to talk about heavyweights too. So, this is basically an explanation on the fact that, and yeah, videos like this usually are like, they're really blowing out of proportion and they're like really reaching, and it becomes ridiculous, and but for real, Major Payne might be one of at least a lot more well constructed than a lot of comedies that are coming out these days. But it was mainly just dismissed as the let's make fun of, you know, dorky kids and fat kids, etc. kind of movie. Much like Heavyweights. So let's actually start with Major Payne, which is based on a drama, based on a drama starring Charlton Heston called the Private War of Major Benson, hence Major Payne's first name in this. And it starts off, and the thing about this is, actually, let's just go right into what makes Major Payne such a great character and why Damon Wayans did such an amazing job with this. For starters, this opening scene, if this opening scene didn't work, the rest of the movie probably wouldn't work. And it's a brief scene, it's just long enough for the opening credits. But the thing here is, it's my understanding that when it first came out, a criticism it faced from some people was that they thought Wayans was miscast. I think that can't be farther from the truth. I honestly, I don't know if it's because I grew up with the movie and have seen it so many times, but you just really can't imagine anybody else. And the reason for this is he's able to balance this. Well, I imagine the thing was that because he was so well known for comedy, particularly in Living Color, but he had, you know, experience in kind of an action genre at this point. Not that apart from the first 2 minutes he needs that in a movie like this, but as far as this opening scene being the reason the whole character works, it's obviously he very much has the comedic talent. That's just where his forte is. But by this point, we'd also had The Last Boy Scout, where he played an intense character, and then we had Mo Money, which obviously is a flat-out comedy. But if you remember it or saw it, Mo Money is also very dark and very violent. Not only is he the star of it, he wrote that. And so it doesn't necessarily feel out of the realm of possibility when you see that going into this. This was just the year before Bulletproof too. And so once this opening scene happens and we realize that this guy is just this, he's actually more or less a bloodthirsty psychopath is what he is, who just happens to be really good at his job. And this kind of deterioration in his character we see when he's basically being told, we don't really do that stuff on the battlefields anymore, you're basically out of job, we don't need you to kill anymore. And watch this guy, we get like 3 minutes of him trying to live life as a civilian, and they do the whole Apocalypse Now thing when he does the whole Martin Sheen being closed up and all that. But they do make it something very funny as well, and kind of take it to that extra level to where it's parody as opposed to just doing the same thing. And there's this whole great quality about the fact that in a comedy, usually it'd probably be a pretty watered down exploration of this kind of character, but then you realize, well, he hasn't even been out for 2 weeks and he ends up in jail. And then shortly after that, like 30 seconds after he's out of jail, we have a scene where he's on the verge of breaking a 6-year-old's finger. intentionally, just because. Um, and those lines about him telling Tiger, the 6-year-old boy, that his tears won't stop Charlie from sticking his bayonet in his heart. And you think pretty much this is going to be the joke, and it pretty much is. It's clearly the premise of the movie. And I could see to where maybe it wasn't... Some people back then didn't necessarily see it as a great idea, where it's basically... it's like Full Metal Jacket with children, with Damon Wayans and Arlie Ermey's place. But I don't know. I think it's pretty abundantly clear from the get-go where the comedic value within this is. And the great thing about this is, not only do I think that he, not only, while being hilarious, kind of in that same Arlie Ermey way, to where the character, the thing that makes it so funny is that the character is dead serious about what he's doing, but his intimidation tactics are just inherently funny. But the thing is that he also is appropriately intimidating, not just because they happen to be kids, but he actually gives off that vibe. I was actually reading that apparently he went through like extensive training and research, and I guess if you look like at a lot of subtleties, it's actually a very accurate portrayal of like a Marine, where like he had just these little details. Like one in particular that I remember reading about was when he gets up in Damien Dante Wayans' face and says, "I am not your damn brother," and his hat goes up, how as soon as he backs away, he instinctively puts the hat back down. Apparently that's like very much a Marine thing, and there's all those details I guess you can see throughout his performance. So I just read that. I know that's a touchy subject matter. I'm not positive that everything is accurate or anything like that, but I do know that I was reading that they put those little touches in there, whether it's 100% accurate or not. But then, going on this, there's also just the way he's introduced, too, because we have the opening shot when he's doing his whole spiel to them, and he's introducing himself and saying what they're going to go through, and it pans down the line, and it's like, this is a great way to introduce the kids, and they're different. You can just kind of tell their different personalities just by looking at them. Just that was just kind of a nice stroke in casting. But when the camera's not even on him, you're still really getting a vibe of his character, the way he speaks to them, and the way he can build his character when the camera's not even on him says a lot about it. And I like the way we once he shaved their heads, we get that same shot just in reverse. So I'll go more into the direction as well. Actually, yeah, that's actually a talking point in Major Payne. I know. But something else that you have to look at here is, well, if you also, like, another thing that he does well is the stare. Like, how he has, even though he's somebody that's known for being a comedian and all that, and it really is a comedic performance, there are still those touches in there to where he's got the I've seen some shit eyes, to where he just looks like he's staring into blankness, like he can have flashbacks at any moment. Like when he's talking to Karen Parsons and the colostomy bag line, the way he just kind of says it in such a vacant way, but it's this long kind of chain of adjectives and description. And another one that just kind of stands out randomly is when, who is it, Wolliger walks up to him to tell him it's the cupcake scene, when he's trying to distract him by saying he's got a phone call. And Payne looks up and says, "Don't you see I'm eating?" But the thing is when Wolliger walks up to him, he's got his lunch in front of him, but he's just sitting idly, not doing anything. It's like Wolliger caught him in like mid-flashback or something. Which just makes it even funnier. Like I said, in a drama, totally traumatic for the character, but in this setting, it's pretty much automatically makes it funny, and it is, effectively. And like I was saying also, there is, wouldn't you dare say, I know this seems like a big leap, but would you not dare say that the character of Major Payne is just as funny and quotable as Arlie Ermey in Full Metal Jacket? You can quote his insults in this just as easily as you can quote the ones in Full Metal Jacket. And there's stuff that's like, I think I would say it's kind of solidified in comedy movie history, the little engine that could sing. I really think it probably could be. But then there's also the moment I was just talking about when Karen Parsons comes into it, and it's kind of like this is it's the movie rule. I mean, obviously, we're going to get to the point to where he meets somebody and a love story blossoms, regardless of the kind of person that he is. But the thing about it is, what this movie does really well is it plants its seeds early, and it doesn't like they capture everything early enough that's going to be a big deal later that it actually doesn't feel contrived as it goes along, even though it has to hit the same kind of story points we've seen before and go through the same structure. But it really, like, the second he meets Karen Parsons, it's not like one of those love-hate things. The second he lays eyes on her, we see him, like, starting to, like, his whole character starting to kind of crumble just at the sight of her. Um, and the way she's able to do that throughout the entire movie, like, anytime he's in a scene with her, we can see his character, he's trying to stay in character, but we can see the actual romantic side of him coming out. Like the way after he tells Tiger and scares him off and says he's going to toss him out the window, the way she kind of talks him down, it's kind of like the Black Widow Hulk thing. It's like she's able to just kind of calm down and actually bring this other side of his personality out. And so it doesn't feel totally contrived when he actually, like, when a love story blossoms out of this. And the fact that they don't really take that too far on screen either. Like, after the date scene, we just kind of see there's just, like, a nice rapport between them. It doesn't necessarily take over the movie, which is something that a lot of really bad shoehorn love stories do. But I thought that was handled really nicely here. Not to mention that Karen Parsons is just her radiant self. This was still, I think this was right towards the end of Fresh Prince, so it was that era of Hillary. So we can see why even somebody like Major Payne could just look at her and say, and just everything goes down. So I always thought that was handled really well, and to the point that it doesn't seem like it's out of character when he kind of can go, and he can kind of go in and out of it whether she's around or not. So I like the way that was done, but then also you look at the fact that we have a lot of kids to deal with as well. And yeah, and it's to the point where, like I said, just by looking, I mean, this could also be a criticism, where just by looking at them you can tell what their personality is going to be. I still think that was just a really good case of casting, but it's not just that. They all kind of get their own individual moments too, most of them. Some of them kind of get thrown by the wayside, like the kid with glasses never really does anything important, and the kid that ends up bunking with Tiger doesn't really get to do a whole lot, but all the other ones have those moments. Particularly, I really like the angle with Dotson's character. He goes through a lot in this hour and a half, where he starts off as, like, as he says, the brown noser. And he's the one that's they basically already had a Major Payne before Major Payne because they have Dotson in their crew. But then we get to see him go through this change where he's really bent on being a kiss-ass, but then the more Major Payne berates him for that, the more he goes against it, and then finally once it gets to the dress scene, Dotson has made a complete 180, and he's now... There's still a distance between him and the others, but he's on the anti-Payne train, and that's a start. But then we go into this whole thing where when his position's taken away, and then Alex is made the leader, he feels betrayed, and so he in turn betrays them by going to the other school. It's like this whole giant character arc for this character that's just on the side, that you more or less becomes a bit of the villain of the story in a very small way. But yeah, yet another one of those things where by the time it gets to the end and he's on the other team and he's a rival, the whole movie's been building to that. It's not just some contrived turn to get us to the climax. So I thought that was really well put together as well. And I also like how much Payne is such a problem for them. You forget how early in the movie it is when the kids reach their breaking point. Like, you imagine a lot of the movie would be putting up with it and all that, and then once it gets to about the hour mark, they'll start plotting against him or whatever. But the cupcake scene's about 25 minutes in, and Alex deciding he's going to hire Bam Bam Bigelow to beat the shit out of him is about a half an hour in. And it's like, there's still an hour of movie left when they've reached their absolute limit with this guy. So I really like the way they did that, to where they pretty much cut to the chase, but they still had plenty of room to do all the other stuff they're going to do. And talking about other cast members, it is worth noting that you can tell it's a cast of kind of unknowns at the time. Like, obviously, Chris Owen would go on to be like, I think Angus was the same year as this, and then obviously, you know, American Pie. But for the most part, the kids are such a main point that our first two credited people are Damon Wayans and Karen Parsons. And then it goes William Hickey, Michael Ironside. And it's like, William Hickey and Michael Ironside combined make up about 2 minutes of this movie. But William Hickey has a very funny character in his one scene. And then his little shot at the end with the net. But Ironside has a really particular scene here, and it's this scene that really is crucial to the relationship between Payne and Alex, where it's actually, they've spent the whole movie being rivals, but we know eventually, because we know formula, eventually this rivalry is going to turn into, they're going to be closer, and as close as two characters with these kind of battling personalities can be. And it's actually a really genuine moment when we see where Alex comes from with the kind of character, because basically you could say, once again, Alex has already had a major pain in his life because of Ironside, only much worse, like, to the abusive extent. And the thing where you can really see the abuse here that you won't know unless you watch the credits, that I've noticed, is, if you look at the credits, Michael Ironside's credit is Lieutenant Colonel Stone. It's a rank in Stone, I'm pretty sure it's that. So, and then obviously we know that Ironside's actually his stepfather. But the thing is this relationship between them is so controlling. Even though he's his stepfather, he's got his last name. So you can tell that there's like a really kind of controlling thing in his life that's really just kind of beating him down. And how he ended up in a place like this. And why he's so hell-bent on standing up to Major Payne, because it's kind of that connotation. It's like, it's like you really, the characters in this are much deeper than you would think in a movie like this. So that's a really good scene and a really great moment. And then going on also, it's talking about characters actually, and stuff that you kind of, stuff that you probably wouldn't notice unless you've seen the movie as many times as I have, which is a billion. And probably a lot of the people who are the same age as me have probably seen it about as many times as well. You start to notice some things, and there's one thing I just kind of took away from this. Like I said, I mean, well, I would say there's no proof of this, but I mean, I feel like it's right there. There's something about Major Payne's character I never really thought about until like the last couple of times I watched it, that makes the character so much more endearing to me. And that is, I think there's proof throughout the entire movie that Major Payne is a closeted movie fanatic. Did you ever notice this? Because there is, he's constantly referencing them. He does the failure to communicate line from Cool and Luke. When he's talking to Tiger about the little people that do big things, he says, like, Little Red Riding Hood, the Three Little Pigs, Spike Lee, and the Little Rascals, and it's like, Spike Lee seems random, but okay, Major Payne's a Spike Lee fan. And then it goes on. He refers to the deaf guy as Marley Matlin's son. So he knows who Marley Matlin is. Then there is, at the end, he references Ace Ventura to the blind guy with the dog. During the Bam and Bigelow scene, he does the Billy Jack reference. And then there is the, obviously his whole thing at the beginning is Apocalypse Now. That's a lot of movie references. But the thing that really tipped this off for me was when he goes to dinner with Karen Parsons and she's trying to figure out his hobbies and things that he likes that doesn't have to do with war. And she says, you know, do you like to do this? And his response is just negative. And so she says, do you like to go to the movies? And there's like a glint on his face. There's like a smile of realization. But then he like realizes he has to go back into character and just comes back down and says negative and dismisses it. And it's like, it's like, I think Major Payne is a closeted movie fanatic, and that's really endearing that he wants to hide that, even though it's clearly in plain sight. It's that kind of shit you notice when you've seen a movie like 100 times. That just completely minuscule shit that's probably not even supposed to be in there. But it really adds to the character for me, as a fellow person like that. So that's what I take away from this now. Um, and so yeah, as far as it being a comedy that didn't get the greatest reception when it first came out, which is the case for a lot of comedies. Like you look back at some of Sandler's early movies, and it's like the ones that we love now, like Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore. They weren't well received when they came out either. They were treated like the way a lot of comedies are today. So it's really kind of weird how comedy's really in this kind of retrospective thing. And there are scenes where I can get that, like if it was in a movie today, I think the cupcake scene would probably be pretty ridiculed. But there's still, because obviously it's just a giant build up just for a fart joke. But the thing about it is the way that it's built up so unexpectedly, and it's like you could really pick this scene apart. Like if you're really bored and angry at this movie, you could say, why didn't he confront Wooliger more than just staring him down about the fake phone call? And why does he eat his cupcake first? It's so clear they're just trying to get to the joke as fast as possible. But the thing is there's still that build-up because they've already set up what is supposed to happen. And it builds up like it's going to happen. Then we think it's not going to happen. Then the payoff happens. And so it's actually, once again, even their fart joke is like a really well-constructed scene of comedy. Even if you might have, some moments you can nitpick here and there. But, yeah, that's the thing, is, and we do end up going through the formula. Like, eventually there's going to be the moment when he has to leave the kids, and he has to decide, oh, this or them, do I like them enough? Have I softened up enough? And he calls himself out for being softened up by Karen Parsons' character and by them. And he says that's the thing. He never goes against character. He says, I'm leaving because that's not me. That's not the character. And he actually leaves. But then they've built it up so much at this point, it's believable. Now, mind you, okay, I'm on the line about the word believable, I guess, that I just said, because there is the whole thing about he could go over there, and he can pretty much, stop these war crimes or whatever it is he's supposed to do. Something that would be very beneficial for the country, and it's to the point where we've seen what he does and how good he is at his job and all the stuff that he stopped from happening, single-handedly. And it's like, well, I want to know what they did about this mission he was supposed to accomplish when he decided to not go and instead come back to the kids. That's something that's kind of open-ended, and you think, oh, I don't know about this decision. But as far as a heartwarming scene goes, there's the moment when he has the Donna Reed fantasy and all that. It's to my understanding that it's the Donna Reed show, right? The theme that plays when he's looking across the street and imagining the white picket fence and him tackling a ninja in his white picket fence fantasy, which is worth noting because I believe one of the main characters' names on that show was Alex Stone. So it's all, there's a lot more thought put into this than you would think. And like I said, the final payoff of Tiger leading them in the games and the final thing, and it's like you think, the kid gets his shining moment. What an idiotically formulaic thing. What a cliche. That's so dumb. But once again, the movie has built up to it the whole time, because the whole thing is that Tiger's too small to do anything. Tiger's too small to fit into the group. Tiger's too small to do anything significant to get some attention. And this is a kid with a real tragic backstory. He's here because he's a damn orphan because of a car accident. And when he finally gets his big moment, the thing is once again, they already planted the scene. They already planted the seed because we had the scene earlier when he is watching them do it. It's one cut really quickly, but we see that Tiger has been standing next to Major Payne this whole time watching them practice this thing. So he knows the whole thing. So it's it all actually fits together. They're doing the formula, they're doing the cliches, but they set it up, and that's the important thing, and that's what makes it kind of above just doing the normal cliche shit and being lazy. They really thought out how all these different things were going to play out. So like I said, if there's one problem I have, it's the whole, what about that mission that's made... it sounded very important, but nevertheless, as far as what it's trying to do, it does very well. Like I said, it's actually Not just when you compare it to, like, other comedies of today that are just getting really shitty. It's actually just a really well put together thing. So yeah, I think it's actually probably a lot better than you. Not obviously it's still funny, but I mean, in general, the way it's something I forgot to go into. The direction. Yeah, the director is Nick Castle. Nick Castle also did Dennis the Menace a couple years before this. Nick Castle, the director of Dennis the Menace and Major Payne, you might also know as Michael Myers. Yeah, he played Michael Myers in the original Halloween, and now he's the director of Major Payne. And the direction of the movie is surprisingly well done too. Like I said, piecing all this together. There's some moments when some of the shots are actually really well done. There's one in particular that stands out where it's almost like a Leone approach. Where I know it's Major Payne, but listen to me. It's this moment when they're going to steal the trophy, which is really a well done scene as a whole. Like the whole build up, the whole fake out, it's shot just right to where we're not expecting the fact that Payne ratted them out and like there's a whole thing waiting for them. But also this shot when they're all walking across the field or whatever, the grass, and then it kind of goes out of focus, and then Alex comes into the shot, and it's like you realize Alex was in the foreground of this shot the whole time when he wasn't even on camera. And it's like, for a comedy like Major Payne, that's a really well-constructed shot. And then it's like the opening shot of For a Few Dollars More or something. It's like the same technique. But the thing also is, there's also, like I said, it's just some of this stuff that you really don't pay attention to in comedies like this, but the way that it's like he doesn't cut when he doesn't have to. There are a lot of scenes in this movie where instead of cutting to something and cutting back, the camera just kind of moves around the room. And I always thought that was just something really, like a technical aspect that just kind of fits for the stuff and doesn't quite give it as much of a feel as just some regular manufactured comedy. It actually feels like thought was put into its construction and the structure of its story and all that stuff. So it's really, because I don't know how many times you have to see it to finally look at it this way, but it's been a while for me, so maybe that has something to do with it. But yeah, some comedies get worse over time, and some comedies are a guilty pleasure. All this stuff considered, I think Major Payne is legitimately good. So that's how I see that. I know it's an odd thing for a movie like this, but let's go on to heavyweights before we use up too much time. We're kind of doing a bit of an opposite turn with Major Payne now, where kind of the main focus was the guy that's more or less terrorizing the kids, but now, in heavyweights, it's the kids themselves that are more the main focus. Which is interesting because the characters aren't near as distinguishable as they are in Major Payne. It's more so because they all kind of have, well, they all had different personalities in Major Payne. We're kind of all they're all kind of in the same boat as heavyweights, which I guess is kind of like the whole idea, but yeah, it doesn't really make the characters distinguishable. But the thing to notice about this movie is, despite the Disney logo on it, and despite the PG Kids movie way about it, yeah, this movie was co-written by Judd Apatow, and if you look all around, like the crew and everything, this was like everybody a lot of the people that worked on Heavyweights would go on to do a lot of the Sandler movies and Apatow stuff, which obviously got much dirtier over time. This is where it's like, you can tell some of these people had a lot to do with Drillbit Taylor. Stephen Brill, obviously, is the director of that, and he was Apatow's co-writer with this. And directed a number of Sandler's movies and worked on them. And you could tell, as far as Apatow goes, and the presence of Paul Feig as well, that this is also kind of like, it kind of serves as somewhat of a predecessor of Freaks and Geeks. This was about 4 years prior. Obviously, this does not have near the quality of Freaks and Geeks, but you could tell it was the guys that were heading in that direction. They just got a lot better by the time they got to Freaks and Geeks, thank God. All the way up to the point that even Alan Covert's in it as Kenny the Cameraman. Yes, the year before Scream, we had another character called Kenny the Cameraman. He was played by Alan Covert in this. And so we start off and we meet this fat kid. I mean, that's what the whole plot of the movie is, so we can call him that. And he comes home from school, and he is, he does have a streak of bad luck, and he is your average kid that's just kind of, he has his friend group, but he's not really the popular kid at all. And then he comes home, and a very weaselly Tim Blake Nelson is waiting in his living room. To basically, and he has convinced his dad, Jeffrey Tambor, that he should go to a fat camp that's disguised as this really great thing. And apparently it is this really great thing when Jerry Stiller and Anna Mira own it. But obviously that's going to go downhill when their son gets a hold of it, Ben Stiller. But the thing here is, you can tell that we're very in this mid-90s way. That's not just the fast food logos and how much they changed, but there's stuff like, I like the line where it's like, I can imagine like Apatow and Stephen Brill trying to speak like, kids that were around in 1995. And he's saying, when they're talking about he needs to go to fat camp, his response is, "But I had plans this whole summer. I was gonna hang out." It's like, he doesn't specify what he's gonna do. He doesn't specify who he's doing it with or what exactly his plans are. His plan is, "I'm gonna hang out." It's like, maybe that's to show that he's hiding the fact that he doesn't have a lot of plans. But I think it's just Apatow and Brill kind of like saying, this is what kids say, right? And then it goes from there, and not only that, not only the whole Sandler connection, but obviously there are some people with some SNL roots in here, which is really interesting when you look at it's kind of like this nice little omen where you realize that a lot of the cast and crew in this movie have SNL roots. One of the main kids is Kenan Thompson, who obviously is like right now of the cast members on SNL right now, he's the one that's like been the longest running up to this point. So that's kind of a cool detail in retrospect. But like I said, the characters themselves don't stand out too much. The problem with this movie is that it's all about these kids, and the kids are the main focus, like I said, kind of the opposite of Major Payne. But the main attraction in this movie is the adult characters. They're the ones that are actually interesting and fun to watch and get the best lines and stuff to do. My favorite character in the movie's got to be Paul Feig as Tim, where he could wear the short denim shorts and the cut-off shirt and get away with it because it was 1995. He could do the wacky thing without it being forced. He just has the real talent for that kind of stuff. Even though I haven't been the biggest fan of the movies he's directed, the guy still does know comedy, and it was obviously the big, kind of the head honcho with Freaks and Geeks, so the dude's definitely really talented, and this really shows that he has comedic talent on camera as well, on a lot of it. And, because there's the whole, when Owen kept pressuring me to talk about this movie, I kept telling him, there's only two things I remember about Heavyweights before I watched it again, and that was Ben Stiller's character just in general, and the scene where Paul Feig dances. Where he dances to Love Machine and actually brings life to the party, which is just hilarious. And going on also, the way it sets up, like the whole setup to where it's kind of the fake out, where we think it's going to be kind of a typical summer camp thing, but then it ends up turning into like, what was the movie with Kevin Bacon? Whitewater Summer, I think, where it basically turns into that. But in a comedic fashion of sorts. So they get there, and everything's supposed to be great, but then as they pass by the entrance, that kid is there, and it's like they're going into Shutter Island. And it's like this kid, it's almost like this, obviously it's a surprise to everybody what happens, but it's like this kid kind of knows that like there's danger afoot, and like there's doom ahead. And so, we go in, and like I said, it's this whole idea of Stiller kind of takes it from his parents. Obviously, they're not real. Obviously, Stiller plays his own dad in the movie, but Stiller's parents in real life obviously play the camp counselors, who usually it'd be like kind of like Alan Arkin in Indian Summer, but then it turns into Stiller coming out as Tony Perkis with his whole crew, and with the shirts that say Perkis Power on them. And he basically starts up this, what we learn is potentially dangerous, very vigorous exercise program, where he becomes obsessed with fitness. And you can tell right off the bat, looking in retrospect, this character is clearly the prototype of White Goodman from Dodgeball. And obviously the character is much more, just got much more going on in that. So this just kind of looks like a vague outline of that. But he is still very funny here for the most part. They do kind of go overboard by the end, but I do like the moments like when he goes through the crowd like this and like one kid high fives him. But the thing here is, and he's like so obsessed with like fitness and health and all that. He says the line is something about my ass is wheatgrass instead of just my ass is grass and stuff like that. Little tiny details like that that are blatantly obvious. But then we go on and we realize that I guess it's supposed to be comedic. This is where I talk about, you can kind of tell where we're in that Drill Bit Taylor territory, where the way this movie, I actually like the way it was done in Drill Bit Taylor, but here, I don't know. This thing that Brill seems to want to do to where when characters are bullies in kids' movies, after a while they are like legitimate psychopaths. And Tony Perkis, after a while, is like a legitimate psychopath. Not only is he like putting them in danger, but he's also like the scene when they find out that he's been taking their letters and not mailing them. And it's like, this guy's actually off his damn rocker, and it's like, what is this movie going to become now? Because it's supposed to be this lighthearted thing. You've got that forced love story with the guy and the nurse. And all these different plots going on, and we're building up to this whole competition thing. But it's, yeah, and then you have his little sidekick, Lars, Tom Hodges. And you'll notice the thing about Tom Hodges being in this. I'm going to begrudgingly bring up a movie here, and that movie is Going Overboard. the first Sandler movie, the Sandler movie that he hates so much, he had it like taken off his official website, and it's like considered one of the worst movies of all time. It's this really fucking bad, cheap movie that's not funny. But you'll notice a lot of people in this movie that have a connection to that. And it's almost like the Sandler crew was kind of trying to save them after that. And Tom Hodges played Sandler's best friend in that movie. And now he's here, and he has this hilarious character throughout the movie. A character you can see like Eric Christian Olsen playing these days, or at least a few years ago. And he's he's doing the the typical accent thing, but his lines in particular just kind of like the whole I have a very deviated septum, so I make a very disturbing sound in my sleep. Don't worry, I'm fine. And like I said, the adults just really steal the show in this, and it really makes you realize just how kind of not that interesting the kid characters are, even though they're supposed to be the main focus and the relatable ones and the ones we root for and all that. But even the guy, I think Pat is his name, the guy that drives the bus and shit, where it's like, even he kind of falls in more with the kid characters, and doesn't have near as many interesting qualities as the, I guess the antagonists, you could say. Even the scene with, Jerry Stiller and Miriam, those characters are like ones you want to see more of, but they only have to be here briefly. And also, and another person that was in Going Overboard that shows up in this, yeah, that was Peter Berg as the cook that theorizes that the kid is dead. That's an uncredited Peter Berg. So it's like this movie was kind of trying to give people jobs that were in Going Overboard to make sure that that movie didn't kill anybody's career. Alan Covert was in that as a bartender as well, so, and obviously he's here again. But now when you look at this, like when you go past the adult character, and like I said, even that kind of starts to wear thin, but when you look at some of this stuff, like, there's some gags to where I don't even really get them, where they seem like they're a build-up for something logical, but then it's just build up to something that's just a gag. Like when they're out with Tony and they start to realize he's actually crazy. He's like jumping around on the branches and stuff on the cliff. And they're like, hey, we're trying to decide if you can do sit-ups without being able to see or hear. And it's like, you think the setup is that they're gonna make him not hear and not see, and while he's distracted they're gonna run away, right? Because they feel like they're in danger. And this is just a setup to the whole ass in the face thing. And it's like, okay. I guess that's the joke. And then they run away. Could you maybe not have run away when you had him distracted? I thought that was the idea, but you wanted to do the whole ass in the face thing. That was the plan. Okay. And then they pretty much catch him by accident. And then it goes into this whole thing where they keep him in the electrified cage, and then this is when the movie starts really going overboard. No pun intended. And the thing here is, we have, like, the scene where they tie Tom Hodges to the tree, and they cover him in honey, and it's like, holy shit. They're trying to get bears to attack him and eat him. Now, mind you, Keenan does say, there's no bears in these woods, we're just fucking with him. But still, there's actually a moment where you actually think that's where they're gonna go, and there's not quite that moment until Keenan says it, where you say, it's weird how easy it is to accept that these kids would be that crazy this fast. This is pretty much what happened with Perkis as well. They've already got the dude, like, practically starving in a electrified cage while they're having fun. And they're doing this really sadistic thing. I understand that Tony Perkis is a bully. I understand that he's, like, way out of line. And actually, we see later kind of violent, too. So he's not a good dude by any means. But, I mean, if we're doing an anti-bullying thing here, one of the things they do to get revenge on Perkis is to play a tape. It's like one of those self-esteem tapes, only in reverse. And they have the tape telling him, you're a loser, you have no friends, nobody likes you. And it's like, Jesus. What is this supposed to accomplish? I understand revenge and all that, but it's like, what's the message of this movie exactly? It's very, very mixed here. And there's the whole thing to where it's like, it's like the whole idea of them being at a fat camp, and it's like, well, there is a message here, I guess, about self-acceptance and all that, but at the same time, you want to kind of throw in the health thing, too, because it's like, you know, you want kids to be healthy. You don't want them to say, oh, I want to be like these kids, the kids that are supposed to be losing weight and getting healthy, but are upset when their candy stashes get found, just because Tony Perkis is crazy. It makes it seem like the kids are totally doing everything right, and the main problem here is what Perkis is doing. And it's like, it's a real, there's so many fucked up messages in this, and it's like, I get what they're trying for, but it seems more like they're headed in this direction. And I don't know. And then it gets to the point to where we get to the competition, and the competition is our climax. This movie has like 2 endings, because we have like a big thing of closure here with Perkis being caught in the act, and the parents finding out what's going on and taking him away, and his dad showing up and all that. But then the competition happens, and it's like, oh yeah, they mentioned the competition like twice. Like, twice. And by the time Perkis is being taken away, we think the movie's over because we completely forgot about the whole competition thing. The whole relay thing. And it's like, oh, well, we thought the movie was over, but now we gotta wait for this thing where they beat the kids we know they're gonna beat because those kids have been terrorizing them and beating them at other sports. And then the movie decides to end. And by that point, it's basically like such an afterthought, and it's like, oh, well, I would have rooted for these kids if they gave me a reason to, and if I remembered this fucking competition was happening. But okay. But honestly, a big problem here is just the fact that, it was really late to the game in a time where this was pretty popular, because, in the whole summer camp movie thing, like, we had Ernest Goes to Camp, and then, like, the year before this was Camp Nowhere. The year before Camp Nowhere was Indian Summer. And it was like, it felt like it was like one of the last in a long line. That's just the ones off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more summer camp movies that were, like, right before this. So if anything, it just felt really late to the game, and it's not as, like, fun, it's not as endearing or funny as Camp Nowhere. It's certainly not as, endearing as Indian Summer, which is probably my favorite in this whole summer camp genre movie. I'd like to think most of us love Ernest Goes to Camp, silliness and all. So yeah, but apparently it's really got like a cult status. Like this movie does have like a real fan base out there. And it's like good for them, and I do, like I was just talking about with Major Payne, it's like, you know, comedy in retrospect is a whole other thing. Like I said, you look at the whole kind of Apatow vibe, and then you go back and you see this was like a starting point for it, and then you kind of put the pieces together. And it's like, I get it, but I just don't think it's that good. But it does have funny moments, mainly with the adult characters. So yes, so clearly I take Major Payne all day in this argument. So that's what we have here. But it is nice to come back to a nice comedic territory. I don't really know what in God's name the next one's going to be, but I'll figure it out. So yes, once again, I'm back to 2 videos a week, thankfully. So yes, we've got Murder on the Orient Express coming up, Justice League the following week. and so on. So, yeah, just, I guess, look out for that stuff if you're interested, and that's